Welcome to the Exodus and Beyond. I'm your host, author R.J. von-Bruening. In this video series, we'll be exploring the Exodus from an esoteric understanding as explored in my book, The Exodus and Beyond, Book 2 of Unlocking the Dream Vision. In this video, we'll look at how the children of Israel continued on their journey after the first tribe settled in the land of the Indus Valley. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit the like button below and subscribe for future videos. This series presents information based in part upon theory and conjecture of the system of esoteric symbolism. The purpose is to suggest some possible interpretation, but not necessarily the only one to the many mysteries we will explore. Once the Aryan-speaking tribe of the children of Israel who had invaded and settled the Indus Valley and Ganges River valleys of northern India, the rest of the tribes continued their journey to the east, where they came upon the Mekong River and its large delta, the world's seventh largest river system. Unlike ancient India and the Indus Valley civilization, we know next to nothing about the people that occupied these territories of the Mekong River Delta system before the arrival of these Indo-European speaking tribes. It is believed that there were several different small kingdoms located on the western side of the Tolen Sap River, which runs from the Great Tolen Sap Lake to the west to the sea, joining the Mekong in the Delta region. The scant archaeological evidence suggests that these kingdoms existed in a state of almost constant warfare with each other. Their overall culture appears to have been heavily influenced by India due to the long-established sea and land routes to the subcontinent. These peoples' actual origin is unknown because their original language, which is normally how historians trace the origins of early people, is unknown and was entirely replaced by the Indo-European language from India. After this, and just as they had done in northern India, once the Indo-European people settled the area, they began assimilating and fusing with the local population. According to legend, ancient Cambodia came into existence through the union of a local Cambodian princess and an Indian Brahmin, a prince. The princess was said to be the daughter of a mighty dragon king that ruled over the watery land far away. One day, this Brahma was sailing by, and the princess paddled out a boat to greet him. Then the Brahma shot an arrow from his magical bow into her approaching boat, causing the fearful princess to agree to marry him. For the traditional dowry, her dragon father is said to have drunk up the waters of the land and presented them to the Brahma so he could rule over, thereby creating the ancient kingdom of Jambumba. Although this, like so many other legends, is historically opaque, it does give us a small look into the cultural forces that helped bring about ancient Cambodia into existence. In particular, this close relationship with the great subcontinent neighbor, India, with almost all the early religions, royal and written communications stemming directly from ancient India and Hinduism. Unlike the Indus and Ganges River valleys, the people of southeastern Asia revered the Naga. The Nagas are a unique class of semi-divine beings that are thought to be half human and half cobra. They are believed to be a rather robust and beautiful race of creatures who can assume either wholly human or fully serpentine form at will. They are believed to be potentially very dangerous to humans, but more often beneficial to humanity. They are also believed to have lived in a vast underground kingdom known as the Nanga Loka, or Palatal Loka, which was filled with beautiful palaces covered in precious gems. The Naga are said to have been created by the native creator deity known as Braham. Braham appears to have been the original father god worshipped along the mother goddess and the bull before the arrival of the Indo-European peoples and Hinduism. He, along with the other local gods, was eventually eclipsed by Shiva, Vishnu, and their version of the mother goddess, Deva. Braham is closely associated with the Vedic creator god, which is known as Prajapati, the identity he later assumed. This provides us with another small insight into the fusing of the different gods of these children of Israel with the local gods of the native people that they assimilated with. As with the gods Idra and Vanuna that we had looked at earlier, where Vanuna was the original king of the gods for the Indus River Valley people, who was then later replaced and fused with the similar Aryan god known as Idra. In the case of Cambodia, it appears that the creator god or supreme god of the tribe of Indo-European people who entered and eventually settled the Mekong River system was initially known as Prajapati, who was then replaced with the local creator god Braham. These changes in the gods' names and identities give us another small look into the politics and settlement and invasion of these Indo-European tribes and how flexible this early religious belief system really was. It appears that the actual names and the manner of worship of the gods was basically unimportant as long as the local people adopted the new belief system's basic ideas. The reason appears to be very similar to what we've seen before with the replacement of the mother goddess. However, in this case, the native people would not accept the Indo-European supreme god, and so the Indo-Europeans adopted the local creator god, Braham, in place of their creator god. Once they adopted the local name and possibly even the local belief, they would slowly transform the local god into a version of their original Indo-European god. In time, the only real difference between the two gods ends up being their names. Although this helps add to the general confusion of the original identity of these gods, it also gives us another example of how the original pantheon of gods of these children of Israel changed and grew as they took over new cultures and people as each tribe inherited their lands. By realizing that these children of Israel were made up of many different Indo-European speaking tribes, it makes sense that one of the reasons the names changed was because each tribe had their own language and names for the gods. For example, the tribe that spoke Aryan and that settled the Indus and Ganges rivers valleys were called the supreme god Idra, but the tribes that settled the Mekong River Delta called this exact same god Prajapati in their native language. This allows us to begin to understand why the same gods go by so many different names. We will return to this subject later on when we've covered much more of this journey. By realizing it was a different Indo-European speaking tribe than the Aryans that had settled in Cambodia, we can easily understand that as the many centuries went along, this had the effect of creating a slightly different form of Hinduism in Cambodia than existed in northern India. This slightly different Hinduism eventually led to the formation of the Khmer Empire and the building of the great temple site at Angkor-Wat. Although Angkor-Wat was built centuries after the initial settlement and invasion of the Mekong River and the Delta system by these Indo-European speaking people, or the children of Israel as we now know them. It provides us with another unique view to the original polytheistic religious belief of these people and the governmental structure that they typically imposed upon the people they took over and eventually assimilated with. Initially, these people that were known as the Khmers were Hindus and were the people believed to have originally built the Angkor-Wat temple complex and surrounding city. At the center of Angkor-Wat was the royal phallic cult dedicated to the supreme god Shiva that was centered around the phallic symbolism of the lingam. With Angkor-Wat, this lingam was placed on the temple's central sanctuary, as was Shiva in India. This Cambodian version of Shiva initially represented as a male fertility god with an unusually large erect penis. However, at a much later time and for unknown reason, the god Vishnu becomes the most important Hindu god in Southwest Asia. His image was placed in the central sanctuary at Angkor-Wat, where it remained until the coming of Buddhism. Although it is unknown why this change took place, it is believed that it reflects some form of great political change that occurred within this empire. Although this empire introduced concepts of that eventually led to the idea of a god king, or literally the Lord of the universe, who was king, refers to the cult associated directly with the rulers of Angkor-Wat, who in time came to become regarded as the earthly representation of the supreme god, commonly known within the Western world as the divine right of kings. Although a special consecration rite and a massive ritual, the kings were believed to be endowed with divine power and responsibility for protecting the state and the people. This was accomplished by performing the same kingly role on earth that the gods performed in the heavens. It is also directly linked to the Hindu idea that the earthly king was directly linked to this in a spiritual manner with the gods, typically Shiva or Vishnu. In time, a cult that was very similar to pharaoh worship in ancient Egypt had developed, and as with Egypt, it was used to justify the state and why the population had to work to maintain the state and the king. This little tiny bit of information provides us with a slightly better picture of these Indo-European speaking children of Israel and how they eventually assimilated the native people in Cambodia. By fusing their culture, language, and religious belief with the native one, they would eventually install a direct monarchy based on this divine right of kings to rule over the state and the people. Over time, the foreign Indo-European culture and the local culture fused into one, thus creating an entirely new civilization and culture that incorporated local beliefs into a religious system that was exclusively based on the complete servants to the gods. The primary focus was once again centered around the three primary gods: the supreme god that we know now as the heaven, and his direct earthly representation of this supreme god who interacted with humans, who was known as the Lord of the Waters, and in time became the king of the gods, with the third being the messenger god that took the sacrifices, offerings, the gifts from humanity and transported them back up to the supreme god. Although this fundamental process is seen every single time these Indo-European speaking children of Israel settle a land, it does change slightly because each tribe speaks its own tribal language and has its own particular tribal god, which for the Aryans was this god Idra, which then was replaced with the local god Shiva. But for the tribe that settled Cambodia, it was a different god who was then eventually changed to the local god known as Branham. Although they are all the same god, each tribal and local differences of each group of people help add to the confusion of the identity of the supreme god. A little confusing, I know. This problem is only compounded with the next stop of these children of Israel, China. We also run into a bit of confusion on what route these Indo-European speaking people may have actually taken. Although it is rather easy to trace where they went, it is difficult to see what route they actually took once they began leaving the lands of Cambodia and the Mekong River Valley. This is primarily because we have evidence that at this point it appears that the path went both north and south. Given the scant evidence, it is reasonable to think that the tribes may have broken into two separate groups, with each group under the leadership of one of the twin brothers, with one group going north into China and the other going south into Australia and eventually into the many islands that make up the South Pacific and make up what we now know as Polynesia. Additionally, we know that one brother was a warrior king in this leadership structure, with the other being a priest king. This allows us to postulate that the group under the leadership of the warrior king went north, with the other group under the command of the priest king going to the south. Unfortunately, it is almost impossible to trace their movements to the south. The only evidence of their passing appears to be a few stories among the thousands in the mythology of the 900 distinct groups of the Aborigines of Australia. It's highly probable that this is because they only encountered similar tribal societies as their own. But unlike their own tribes, these Aborigines of Australia were spread out over a vast area with no central government or leadership, with the many different tribes more or less being isolated from one another. This would have made it next to impossible for these children of Israel to take over as they had before in the land of Canaan, India, or Cambodia. It also equally possible that by breaking into two separate groups, the numbers of each group were small enough that the chances of being able to conquer or unite the local tribes that were spread out over the Australian outback were relatively small. As we will learn shortly, the group that journeyed south was likely the smaller of the two groups. Because of this smaller number, they slowly intermarried with the local people, thereby losing their original identity to the point that only a few vague stories of twins are all that remain. The only universal myth within the Aboriginal tribes that seems to mark the passing of these children of Israel is the stories about the rainbow serpent. Unlike the serpent-slaying myths that we'll explore later in our journey, the main character of these myths, the rainbow serpent, is clearly a version of the Lord of the Waters. In all the myths, the rainbow serpent is an unusually powerful, creative, magical, and often dangerous serpent that is closely associated with the rainbow, rain, deep water holes, and rivers. It is said that it descended from the dark serpent-like streak in the Milky Way and revealed itself to the people as a rainbow that moves through the water. As it moves through the world, this enormous serpent shapes landscapes with water, sometimes drowning the people or swallowing them whole. As with the Lord of the Waters, as we've seen before, there seems to be a twofold aspect to this rainbow serpent. Sometimes he was healer and the bringer of life through his rains, but he could just as easily blight with illness and death and with sores. As for their path north, there is no doubt that these Indo-European people entered into China and had a massive impact on ancient Chinese society and culture. However, in China, they encountered a radically different type of society than they had encountered before. Although the ancient narrative of China's earliest times is tough to almost impossible to recover, we can outline it with a little bit of confidence. We know that before the arrival of the Indo-European speaking people of Israel, Chinese civilization was composed of two main tribes known as the Shang and the Chao, with the Chao being more commonly known today as the Zhao. I hope I pronounced that correctly. At the time of the arrival of the tribes of the second phase of the Exodus, the Shang tribe ruled much of China, with the Zhao occupying the lands to the west of central China. Both tribes were very similar in their structure, their government, their religious beliefs, their culture, and their traditions. Nevertheless, the Shang tribe was the first name with the independent evidence to support it within the traditional list of dynasties and is the basis of Chinese chronology and are the people we will examine first. Unlike the other lands that these children of Israel had entered and conquered, Shang China was not ruled by a small group of elites that was a central power as with most traditional kingdoms. They were instead organized around a massive feudal-like system for the elites that was based upon a slave society for the countless peasants. Shang China consisted of hundreds, if not thousands, of large estates that held large reserves of human resources that were ruled over by very powerful families, whose leaders operated as a warlord, with them being the absolute ruler over their vast land holdings and the peasants that made up the vast majority of the population. The Shang's domain's primary political arrangements seem to have been dependent on the uniting of the largest and most powerful land-holding families that were organized around obligations to a powerful king or emperor-like figure. Although this arrangement is very similar to a European medieval vassal system, it differs in the respect that the emperor was not viewed as the supreme holder or owner of the lands within Chinese society. In ancient Chinese society, the land was owned by the ruling families of the states, with the emperor only having ownership of his own lands. The emperor was normally just the most powerful of the current warrior landlords of the largest estates. Even if he took another estate's lands by force, he would not be viewed as the rightful owner of those lands by the other large estate ruling families. These warrior landlords were the key figures in ancient Chinese society. They were also the leading members of the many families whose lineages that claimed semi-mythical origins. Nevertheless, Shang China was not a simple feudal state ruled over by warrior landholders. It had a highly advanced government that used scribes, standardized currencies, weights, measures, and had a highly effective system of bureaucracy that could mobilize massive amounts of labor for building fortifications and entire cities if needed. The other significant difference was that the many tribes of the Shang and the Zhao, religion was incredibly crucial to the early Chinese society, with it extending into the political, economic, and family structures. The basis of the entire system was, of course, the family, which has emerged as the legal refinement and subdivision of the clan. There were about 100 clans, within each of which marriage was forbidden with members of that same clan. Each clan claimed to have been founded by a great hero or god. The patriarchal heads of the clan's family and houses exercised special divine authority over its members. They were the only ones believed qualified to carry out its rituals and to act as intermediaries with the powers that control the universe on the clan's behalf. Over time, these persons came to be viewed as the only people entitled to possess land or hold office due to their essential value as the descent, whose original were godlike. The common people of the lower classes, especially the millions of peasants, were forbidden to take part within the religious rituals of these clans. In turn, they founded their own religions, primarily maintaining the ancient worship of nature gods, which the elite too always paid some attention and respect to. The worship of mountains, rivers, and the spirits that were said to live among them became an essential imperial duty in the earliest times. Although the worship was deemed necessary, it had less of an influence on Chinese religious thought than other religious traditions. This religious thought had considerable repercussions on the political forms of early Chinese society. The heart of the ruling house claim for complete obedience was religious superiority. It was through the maintenance of ritual which gave it access to the goodwill of unseen powers of the world, whose intention might be known from the oracles. Since the earliest days of Chinese society, the great decisions of state and many lesser ones were taken by consulting with oracles who spoke to the ancestors. This was done by engraving turtle shells or the shoulder blades of certain animals with written characters and symbols, and then applying a heated bronze pin or rod to them so they would produce cracks on the reverse side. The direction and length of the cracks in relationship to the written characters and symbolism would then be read accordingly. This practice was normally crucial in that these oracle bones, as they became known, were kept presumably as records. These oracle bones also provide us with the earliest evidence of the foundation of Chinese language. Characters found on the oracle bones in some early bronzes are basically the same as those of classical Chinese. We know that the Shang had over 5,000 such characters, although not all of them can be read to this day. Furthermore, by the end of the Shang's dynasty, the king had become the only one believed to be able to correctly interpret the oracle bones, thereby making him the primary shaman of the entire nation. Although the Shang kings, who considered themselves divine rulers, also consulted with the great gods, the supreme being who ruled over all of humanity and nature was the one that gave him advice and wisdom. One additional characteristic of early Chinese religious thought was the practice of ancestor worship. Not only were the gods honored by ritual, but also essential and powerful ancestors were also honored and sometimes even worshipped. In many cases, the hero or god that was the founder of the clan becomes just as important, if not more important, than the gods in benefiting the clan. At the heart of this idea was that the belief that only a nobleman could share in the cults that were behind the Chinese notion of kinship and the clans. Only a nobleman belonged to a family, which meant only he had ancestors. The reverence for ancestors and the propagation of the spirits that had existed long before the Shang. However, it does not seem that within these early times that many ancestors were believed to have survived into the spirit world. It appears the only ones believed to exist in the spirit world were the spirits of particularly important or heroic individuals, with the most likely being the rulers themselves, whose ultimate origin, as it was claimed earlier, was godly. Early Chinese culture's unique character made Shang China a vastly different type of beast, and about next to impossible for these Indo-European speaking children of Israel to conquer and settle as they had before. However, located to the west of Shang China, there was a tribe known as the Zhao. This tribe was very similar to the Shang in many respects, but they had very little political power at this very early time. Historians have long debated the beginning of this tribe. It is known that they had coexisted with the Shang at various times. They were even a friendly tributary state to them, but at other times they alternately went to war with them. It appears that this tribe of Zhao living in western China are the people who these children of Israel eventually fused with. However, unlike before, they were not the mighty conqueror that sooner or later killed the ruling elites, thereby replacing them with themselves. For the Zhao were organized much like the Shang, and this put these children of Israel at a significant disadvantage. They had little choice but to move into the area peacefully or risk being destroyed by the vastly more numerous Zhao or completely wiped out by the even more powerful Shang. Additionally, the vast difference in religious thought would also place these children of Israel at a great disadvantage, since most Chinese, which included the elites and the peasants, would not accept a foreign religion that was not related to or included ancestor worship with the central ideas of the clan, the family, and the ancestors that made up both the Shang and Zhao society, culture, religion, and political structure that supported it all. Given what little information we have, it appears that these Indo-European speaking children of Israel were assimilated by the Shao, primarily through intermarriage and by serving the most powerful clans of the Zhao. They may have fulfilled the position of being the honored foreign military or religious advisors to these royal families, and in the process of doing this, they completely lost their identity as a people, with their stories, religious thought, customs, and rituals being taken over and completely transformed into uniquely Chinese interpretations with Chinese characters, gods, ancestors, and completely replacing the original story. Their language also uniquely transformed into Chinese, with the adopted words having similar meanings but a different pronunciation and use. Although the tribe of these children of Israel that settled in China lost their identity as a people, including their religion, their language, and their culture, they nevertheless had a profound impact on the political, religious, and military thought of the Zhao. This fusing of the Zhao and the tribe of the children of Israel that settled in China eventually led to the Zhao's ruling houses devising a plan to conquer the Shang. After many years of bloody fighting, the Zhao were successful in conquering the Shang. However, a rebellion broke out before they could consolidate all the territory that was ruled by the Shang. Brutal fighting went on for almost 3 years before the rebellion was put down, allowing the Shao to solidify and control all of China. This was accomplished by taking over the Shang estates and creating an array of feudal states that maintained order, with a new emperor holding a claim over all the land. This was one of the first major changes under the Zhao, that they changed the idea of the king into that of a divine emperor whose power and claim is for all the lands of the world that came directly from the gods, primarily the great god Shang Dai and their ancestors. Remarkably, unlike most of the areas these children of Israel settled, Bronze Age China did not enter a long dark age, but instead had a great flowering of cultural achievements that reflect the diversity of the feudal state that composed the Zhao dynasty. The arts in general were essentially a continuation of those of the Shang dynasty. Strangely enough, there was a deterioration in the quality of the casting of bronze during this time period. Archaeological evidence indicates that this decline in the quality of the bronze was because the Zhou tried to maintain a monopoly on the metal with a new focus on military weapons that was not due to any general cultural decline. Not only was there a cultural flowering of the arts during this time, Chinese society in general underwent dramatic changes with the development and introduction of iron, ox-drawn plows, crossbow, horseback riding, and all of it on an incredibly large scale. There are also numerous large-scale irrigation projects that were undertaken, which significantly increased crop yields, with new roads and canals being constructed connecting all the various feudal states together into one larger state. These changes led to more trade and the founding of new towns and cities along these trade routes. The development of trade led to the development of coinage, accounting, and greatly expanded the primitive writing system of the Shang period into the Chinese writing system that is still more or less used today. There was also a tremendous flowering of philosophical thought and the founding of many different schools of thought, along with the unique Chinese system known as legalism. From the lands of China, the remaining tribes of the children of Israel under the leadership of this warrior king brother eventually continued northward into Japan. Although, like China, much of the early Japanese history is very hard to recover, it is clear that these Indo-European speaking children of Israel entered Japan and had a tremendous impact on early Japanese culture and society. The current archaeological evidence suggests that Japan had initially been a country divided up among several powerful clans, which were then each ruled over by an emperor with an ill-defined royal supremacy based on the ancestry traced back to the sun goddess. As with the people of Cambodia and their form of Hinduism, the main thrust of Japan appears to come later after a similar system was fully developed in China. There was a significant influence from China with the introduction of iron technology and Chinese writing and characters, which provided a written form of the native language. These were attempts to bring about administrative changes that were directly based upon Chinese systems. Although there was cultural attraction and an interdependence between China and Japan in this early time, it did not mean political submission by the Japanese nor an acceptance of Chinese culture. Japanese central administration already was highly developed in scope and scale when these children of Israel arrived on their shores of their island. As they had done in China, they were forced to assimilate and fuse with the largest tribe or clan on the island. In this case, they fused with the great Fujiana tribe. As with the Zhou in China, these children of Israel completely lost their identity once they had fused with this tribe. And eventually, all their culture, stories, and everything eventually become a uniquely Japanese version. Once they had fused with Japanese people, they began to tie themselves very closely to the imperial household by marriage and over approximately a 100-year period. Since it was common in Japanese society for the children to be brought up in the household of the mother's family, the clan could exercise crucial influence upon future emperors while they were children. Within just a few hundred years, this Fujiana clan was effectively in control of the entire central government of Japan through marriage and alliances with other powerful clans that allowed them to hold key offices of the imperial court, acting in the name of the emperor. Japan allows us a small peek into how the children of Israel were able to slowly take over the central governmental systems through marriage, alliance, and holding court offices, though they had lost their identity as a people. As with China, these children of Israel could not impose their religious beliefs upon the elites, nor the common people of Japan. This is because since the earliest beginnings of the historical era, even down to the present day, the keys of continuity and the general toughness of Japanese society has been the family and the traditional religion known as Shinto, whose essence was the worship at the proper times of specific local, personal, and clan deities who provide protection and favor to each of the clans. And the clan was an enlarged family, with the most enlarged family of all being the nation. In patriarchal style, the emperor presided over the national family, just as a clan leader would over his clan, or even the smaller father would over the family. This provided a tremendous social unity to the Japanese people, with the emperor being at the focus. As with China, Japan did not enter a long, dark age, but underwent another great flowering of culture during this time. Nevertheless, it was more or less sealed off from the rest of the world and from the ordinary Japanese and the world as large, as the material subject matter and standards were essentially restricted to the court. The court art, which was shaped by the court settings and events that were eventually enjoyed by a relatively narrow circle of elites. The great majority of Japanese people never even saw the products of what is now believed to be the great first peak of Japanese culture, and laid much of the foundation of the future Japanese state. With its ideals of simplicity, discipline, good taste, and a love of nature that sometimes seem somewhat frivolous in our modern times, but is always uniquely Japanese. Although we move on to the next leg of the Great Exodus, not only did the Chinese and Japanese culture flower after the arrival of these children of Israel, their societies were eventually transformed into a more militaristic and warrior-based societies. This change adds significant weight to the idea that the original group of tribes had broken into two separate groups, with each one under the leadership of one of the twin brothers, with a group under the warrior king going north into the lands of China and Japan, where eventually a warrior-based society was established, while the other group went south into Australia and then across the many islands of the Pacific Ocean, leaving only a few stories, ritual, words, and customs with the people they encountered. In our next video, we'll continue on to this journey as the children of Israel eventually go into the New World. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button below and subscribe for future videos.